Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a great English story with heart, humor, and lessons you'll actually enjoy. Today's video is titled A Short English Love Story That Will Touch Your Soul. And trust me, it's got everything. Awkward coffee spills, unexpected romance, emotional healing, and a guy who plays the ukulele very badly but still wins her heart. So what's the story? It all begins when Eliana, a quiet illustrator with trust issues and a love for almond croissants, gets knocked over, literally, by Noah, a flannel-wearing biology teacher with a cat named Aristotle and a charm he doesn't even realize he has. One crash, one terrible joke, and one ruined latte later, they begin meeting every Tuesday at a cozy bookstore cafe. From there, we follow their journey through laughter, secrets, silence, and the storm of real life, until they must decide whether love is worth holding on to when everything else feels broken. But this story isn't just romantic. It's also a great way to learn English through natural conversation and emotion-filled storytelling. So as you listen, ask yourself, can you spot the idioms hidden in their dialogue? Do you know what my favorite chapter means in emotional context? How would you describe someone who makes you feel seen, using your own English words? And here's a fun question. What's more powerful, saying, I love you, or showing it with quiet actions? Think about that as you hear how Noah waits, how Eliana draws what she cannot say, and how love finds a way even after silence. Ready to improve your listening skills and get emotionally invested? Grab a cup of tea. Maybe don't spill it like Eliana. Sit back and let's dive into a story that might just make you feel a little more human and a whole lot more fluent. It was a breezy spring morning when Eliana's life collided, quite literally, with Noah's. She had just stepped out of the bookstore in town, her arms full of novels she had no time to read, when a cyclist swerved to avoid a squirrel and crashed into her. Books flew, coffee spilled, and so did words that couldn't be printed in children's books. She landed with a thud, sprawled on the pavement, blinking up at the man who now hovered over her, helmet askew, looking horrified. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" he asked, offering a hand as a paperback slid off his shoulder. She blinked again, partly from pain and partly from the embarrassment of having just been flattened by someone who looked like a walking Pinterest board. Messy curls, kind eyes, and a flannel shirt that smelled faintly of peppermint. "You ran me over," she muttered, letting him pull her up. "Technically, I swerved into you," he corrected, sheepishly brushing off her coat. Totally different crime. She didn't smile. Not yet. But when she realized her caramel latte was now soaking the first few chapters of her newly bought novel, she let out a frustrated sigh. And that's when he offered the strangest peace treaty she'd ever received. "Let me buy you another book," he said, looking so guilty it was almost funny. "Or coffee. Or both. Or just say the word, and I'll throw myself into traffic." She finally laughed. And that was the start of something unexpected, something that would come to define every Tuesday for the next 8 months. They began meeting at that same bookstore cafe, first by coincidence, then by choice. Eliana was a freelance illustrator who had trust issues and an unhealthy obsession with almond croissants. Noah was a biology teacher who quoted Shakespeare when he was nervous and had a cat named Aristotle. Their conversations started light. Favorite books, weird dreams, bad exes, why socks disappear in the laundry, and turned deeper without them realizing. She told him about her mom who left when she was 9, about the art school she didn't get into, about the notebooks she filled with ideas but never showed anyone. He told her about his little sister in rehab, the divorce he never saw coming, and how he once cried at a dog food commercial. They made each other laugh when the world felt heavy, and slowly, without fanfare, they became each other's calm. Every meeting ended with a story and a promise for the next. There was a rhythm to it, like a song only they could hear. No grand confessions, no dramatic first kiss, just stolen glances, lingering goodbyes, and the quiet safety of knowing someone saw you even when you weren't trying to be seen. By the end of spring, the bookstore cafe felt less like a public place and more like a shared world they had built together. One where time worked differently and the air always smelled like ink and pastries. Eliana began sketching again, sometimes in the middle of their conversations, scribbling Noah's expressions when he got too passionate about honeybees or tried to mimic British accents and failed miserably. He noticed everything about her, the way she tapped her thumb against her coffee cup when thinking, how she always wore mismatched socks, and the way her eyes dimmed slightly whenever someone asked too many questions about her childhood. Noah never pushed. He let her open up slowly, like a novel whose plot unfolds page by page, never skipping chapters. One night, after they closed the cafe together and sat under the flickering street lamp outside, he brought a ukulele and tried to play the chorus of her favorite childhood song. He wasn't good. He was absolutely terrible, in fact, but he sang anyway, off-key and laughing, and that made her cry a little. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was honest. "You know, I have the musical talent of a sleepy goat, right?" he said, wiping her tears with the back of his hand. She shook her head. "You're better than you think." That night, they didn't kiss. They didn't need to. They sat shoulder to shoulder, wrapped in silence that felt full instead of empty. It wasn't always perfect. They argued sometimes about silly things like whether cats were better than dogs or who got to name their imaginary future pet turtle. And other times, they argued without words, like when Eliana would retreat into herself for days, ignoring texts, drowning in her art and memories she didn't like confronting. Or when Noah grew quiet after a phone call from his sister, overwhelmed and unsure how to explain the helplessness he carried. But each time, they came back to each other. Apologies weren't always spoken, but they showed up in an extra croissant left on the cafe table, in a doodle slipped into a book Noah was reading, in the way he played her favorite movie without asking, just because he knew she needed it. Slowly, Eliana started letting go of the fear that it would end like all the stories she hated, tragic, abrupt, unresolved. And Noah, in turn, let himself believe that sometimes love doesn't need a big moment to begin. Sometimes it grows in the quiet, in the comfortable, in the ordinary. One afternoon, during a sudden downpour, they ran through the streets of Maplewood barefoot, drenched, laughing like kids who had just escaped school detention. When they reached the overhang of the bookstore, he looked at her, soaked, radiant, alive, and said softly, "You're my favorite chapter." She rolled her eyes and called him a cliché. But when he reached for her hand, she didn't let go. She didn't want to. That night, as the storm rumbled above and the city lights shimmered against the wet streets, Eliana kissed him for the first time. No music, no fanfare, just her lips against his, like punctuation finding the sentence it had always belonged to. And from that moment on, things shifted. They weren't just Tuesdays anymore. They were late-night calls, Sunday breakfasts, rainy day movies, and whispered dreams. Love, she realized, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was as simple as a hand reaching for yours, again and again, without needing a reason. By the time autumn arrived, their lives had begun to intertwine beyond quiet cafes and casual laughter. Eliana had a drawer at Noah's apartment filled with her sketch pads and mismatched socks, and he had started leaving his toothbrush in the floral cup beside her sink. It wasn't discussed, it just happened, like the way you stop noticing when a song becomes your favorite until you catch yourself humming it every morning. She would draw him without telling him, his profile while he read, the way his eyes softened when talking to his students over video calls, his ridiculous dance moves while frying eggs. He, in turn, left tiny sticky notes all over her apartment. "Your sunshine in disguise" on her bathroom mirror. "Drink water, or I'll call your grandma" on her fridge. And once, "I love your face" tucked inside her wallet. They were happy. Ridiculously, stupidly happy. But happiness, Eliana knew too well, was a fragile thing, like a paper bird floating through a thunderstorm. The first sign of lightning came with a voicemail. Her father, who had been absent for most of her life, was in the hospital, diagnosed with a late-stage illness. She hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. Memories of half-hearted visits, broken promises, and that one birthday he forgot to call all came flooding back like an unwelcome tide. She didn't want to see him, but she couldn't bring herself not to. Noah offered to go with her, but she shook her head. "I need to face this alone," she said, her voice flat. He nodded, even though every part of him wanted to hold her and keep her from reopening old wounds. She was gone for 4 days. During that time, she barely responded to his messages. When she returned, she looked the same but quieter. She didn't cry, didn't talk. She just curled into his chest like a storm that had passed, but hadn't finished, leaving damage behind. He didn't push. He never did. But something shifted, not in a dramatic storybook way, but like a picture slightly tilted on the wall. They still held hands, still laughed, but there were more silences now. Longer pauses. Eliana started canceling plans more often, saying she needed time to work, to think, to breathe. Noah, caught between patience and fear, struggled with the not knowing. He wasn't afraid of distance. He was afraid of being kept out. And she, for all her bravery, didn't know how to let someone help her carry a pain she barely understood herself. Then came the night they had dinner with Noah's friends, and Eliana froze when someone asked about her family. She made a joke, changed the subject, smiled too brightly. But in the car afterward, she was quiet. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. "I'm tired," she whispered, not looking at him. That night, they slept back to back, inches apart that felt like miles. The next morning, she was gone before he woke up, leaving a note that simply read, "I just need space." He stared at it for hours, his mind trying to solve a puzzle without knowing what pieces were missing. Days passed, then a week, and for the first time since the day he ran into her with a bicycle and a bad joke, Noah didn't know if she would come back. The days after Eliana's disappearance stretched endlessly, the kind of slow, aching time that makes even ordinary moments feel unnatural. Noah tried to focus on his work, on his students, on anything that didn't remind him of her laugh echoing off the bookstore walls or her sketches left unfinished on his coffee table. But she was everywhere. Her scent clung to the sleeves of his hoodie. Her doodles were stuck in his textbooks, and her voice echoed in his mind when he walked past the cafe where they used to meet every Tuesday. He didn't text her. Not at first. He wanted to give her the space she said she needed. But after 2 weeks, he couldn't stand the silence any longer. "I miss you." No pressure. "Just miss you." The message went unread. A day later, "The weather's terrible. I made soup. You would have hated it. Too many carrots." Still nothing. That kind of silence hurt more than anger. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent. It was still, cold, final, and it made him question everything. Had he said too much? Not enough? Had he expected her to heal faster than she could? He wanted to understand, but you can't decode a heart that's too afraid to speak. Meanwhile, Eliana stayed tucked away in her apartment, surrounded by blank canvases and unopened books. She hated herself for vanishing, but she didn't know how else to survive. Seeing her father had torn something open inside her, something raw and bleeding, and she didn't know how to carry that wound into someone else's arms. She thought disappearing would protect Noah from her darkness, from the weight of emotions she couldn't control. What she didn't realize was that leaving him like that created a different kind of wound, one filled with questions instead of answers. One night, after weeks of silence, she stood in the doorway of the bookstore cafe. It was closed. The chairs were upside down on the tables. She looked inside and imagined herself there with him, laughing, doodling on napkins, stealing glances when she thought he wasn't looking. She realized, standing in that doorway, that she had tried to run from her pain, but all she had done was run from the person who never asked her to be anything other than herself. Noah had never demanded her healing. He had only ever offered his presence. and she had mistaken that for pressure for expectation. She went home and finally opened the notebook she hadn't touched in over a month. On the first page, she drew the two of them sitting under the street lamp after the first song he played. Then she added the words, "You're not the light at the end of the tunnel. You're the person who sat with me in the dark." She cried while drawing, not softly, but in gasps and waves, like a dam finally breaking. And when the last tear fell, she picked up her phone and typed 3 words, "Can I come?" Noah didn't respond right away. He was in the middle of class when her message popped up, and his heart beat so loud it drowned out the noise of the classroom. He excused himself, walked into the hallway, stared at the words for a full minute, and then typed back, "You never had to ask."